For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, so basically a heck of a turnaround as far as Wall Street was concerned last night. And so really shares in Asia Pacific have actually jumped quite considerably this morning. Nikkei up 3.46, Topic gaining 2.69, Japan's yen though plunged to its lowest levels against the dollar, but this is nothing to do with the yen. It's more to do with dollar strength because of the hot inflation numbers that they had yesterday in the United States. Singapore, I'll come on to that. Their GDP grew slightly, but China, just back to China. China consumer prices, its inflation jumped the most in more than 2 years. I mention this only because it's the fastest rate since 2020, so something is happening in that economy. But, and this is another subject really, so we're just on the fringes of the 20th National Congress Communist Party of China conference. And when that actually happens, I'd be very interested to see what Xi Jinping says about technology and so on, because the global reality is that China is being excluded from the frontiers of technology by the United States. There's this ongoing trade war with the United States. It's also got this zero COVID policy as well, which is slowing it down. Be interesting to see what he says about China growth as a result of that. Back to Singapore, and that growth shows that they've avoided recession. The central bank has tightened its policy. Now, they don't do central bank monetary policy in terms of interest rates in Singapore. They tend to do it in terms of currency. That works for them. But you can see that they are tightening and they're going along with the global trend of most economies actually tightening. I just want to briefly touch on El Salvador. We would, they adopted Bitcoin as their national currency. And at the time, I think we were saying on this program that, yeah, it works very well if everybody has access to it. Well, clearly they didn't. The value of the currency has gone down by about 60% since the experiment started. Inflation is about 87% this year, and so it's lost about $60 million on the Bitcoin experiment. I only mentioned this. It's very difficult to judge what happens in a country like that, but clearly, yeah, Bitcoin's a great idea, but it has to have universal adoption before it actually works. You have to stop worrying about the bits and stop worrying about the technicalities and start worrying about who's actually got access to it. So back to the United States, and the Dow, an extraordinary 800 points higher. I hit an absolutely historic turnaround. You'd be wondering about that, wouldn't you? Wondering why there was this big turnaround on Wall Street. I've asked a number of people this morning, and all they're saying is that they think that investors are betting that the worst of inflation is over. I'm not absolutely sure about that. I was talking to somebody in Washington yesterday, and they were saying that, yeah, you really got to watch. You got to watch places like Walmart and so on to find out what people are actually shopping for. Are they buying big tellies, for example, or slightly smaller ones? That's where the key of an economy actually is, in consumer items. So big bank earnings today. The big bank earnings season begins today after the bell. JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, and Citigroup all report after the bell. So it'll be a big earnings day today. They also get retail sales in the United States as well. So there may be a bit more of that information there. As far as the EU is concerned, Germany has been pushing back. Now, what Germany introduced was a 200 billion euro energy emergency package for Germany. And this has got a bit of an uproar in the EU because they're saying that Germany is actually quite selfish about it. Germany's excuse is, say what you like, but the rest of the EU needs a prosperous Germany and doesn't need it going into recession. I mean, you can argue that till the cows come home, basically, but that's what Germany is actually pushing back on. And as a further idea of cooperation, France has actually sending Germany gas for the first time since the energy crisis. Not an enormous amount. It's less than Germany's daily needs, but it's welcome, no doubt, as the whole of the EU battles to diversify its energy. What on earth is going on in the UK? Well, what we do know is the Chancellor's come back, Kwasi Kwarteng's come back early from the IMF conference in Washington. The pound is hovering at 2-week highs, on account of they suspect that there probably will be some kind of reversal. 2% higher. The Liz Truss may well be, there's a lot of gossip about how they're actually going to be replaced, and maybe Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak would come in to replace them. This would be an extraordinary political turnaround if it were to happen. But that's the political emergency that's actually happening here right now, and they've come, and Kwasi Kwarteng has left early from the IMF to come back and talk about the economic crisis which is engulfing the UK. It brings to mind actually 1976, I think it was, when the Chancellor then, Dennis Healey, the then Chancellor, nearly got to the airport and the IMF called him back and said, no, you've got to come back and talk about this because the country's going to rack and ruin. That was 1976. A lot's changed since then, but it says a lot when a Chancellor has to leave an organisation, a conference like the IMF, and come back and talk political crisis. And finally, oil. We touched a little bit on the Global Business Report with this yesterday. The Biden team, they're very concerned that Russia's oil price cap may backfire after the OPEC cuts. In other words, I think what they're meaning is that prices probably will move upwards. We have that UBS forecast the middle of the week of $125 a barrel of oil. So that looks sort of likely. That's the global view.
All right, real quickly. Number one will be the case of the UK. The BOE is obviously doing something. They're propping up the pound sterling. That's not the real rate of the pound sterling against the dollar in the market. Some speculators are saying it's way worse than that, but they're propping the currency up. So is it true what the BOE is saying, that they'll cut those buybacks by Friday, or they're still doing it? Because we don't even know what is going on now. It's quite very nebulous. And secondly, what's going to be the long-term plan for Europe with gas? Because that's a pertinent question. Because now, the Eurozone, despite its inflation, high inflation level, is now spending subsidies on home and households in Germany and some other parts.
It is, but I understand we're limited for time, so I'll do it very, very quickly. First of all, gas, as far as Europe is concerned, what they've done is they have quite high storage right now. I'd prefer to answer a question about that in a couple of days when it's slightly clearer about where the gas market's going. But certainly the overall warnings are not coming to fruition. There is gas storage space being built in Europe as we speak. It looks as though it's going to be very difficult winter, no question about that. But it looks as though that emergency that was originally thought of may not happen in quite the sort of volume that it has. As far as the Bank of England's concerned, yes, I think the crucial thing is going to be this afternoon, actually. That's what the market's saying. This afternoon and Monday morning, will it actually continue with its support for the gilt market, or will it withdraw it? The reason that sterling is where it is right now, and it's not that much, but it's 2% higher than it was, is simply because there is a feeling that some of the conservative mini-budget measures may well be reversed. Again, that'll happen over the weekend. I think Monday will be absolutely crucial as far as this goes.
Well, Michael, very quickly, to manage time, Japan, the Bank of Japan, has consistently kept interest rates low. Now the yen keeps going down against the dollar. Mr. Suzuki says, we're going to take appropriate actions to prevent the volatility of the yen. The only appropriate action that is available is to increase interest rates. Is it likely? Is Japan likely to do that? What are we likely to see? That's number one. So. Number two.
I think Japan is in a very good place at the moment. The weakness, the reason it's falling, it's not about the weakness of the yen. It's about the strength of the dollar. Quite simply, as I said, because of the high inflation figures coming out of the United States yesterday, and the expectation that the Fed will actually rise. So basically, Japan really lives on its exports rather than its expensive imports. They will have to continue to weigh up whether those imports are inflationary. I suspect they probably are, given the figures they had this week. But certainly, a slightly weaker yen will help their balance of payments very, very slightly. So what they appear to be coming out of this de-escalation of the economy, which has been moribund for about 10 years, and they appear to be growing quite well. And it is still the fourth largest economy in the world and a very useful ally, I would suspect, in terms of manufacturing and also in the United States trade war against China.
Okay, I was also going to ask you, it looks like Ms. Liz Truss has 17 days to go. But Kwateng, who is rushing back from Washington, D.C., is saying, I'm not going anywhere. What gives him that confidence? Considering the disaster at the Conservative Party conference, considering the chaos at the appearance before the backbenchers, and considering the fact that many backbenchers are saying that Liz Truss has to be replaced, a kind of coup, looking for a unity candidate. Why is Kwateng so confident that he's not going anywhere?
Whether what he says and what he feels will be two different things, as they are with most politicians. I mean, he doesn't want to be seen to be retreating in panic from the IMF and coming back, but at the same time, he wants to be seen to be discussing things in an orderly fashion. I mean, who knows how quickly politics actually work? I did say that there is another team building up. There is dissension within the ranks. There is an enormous amount of revolt at the moment. I suspect this will play out over the weekend, and we may get some sort of slightly clearer view by Monday, but it will be a very busy weekend, and I would not rule out further U-turns as far as that mini budget is concerned. Now, whether that means that Truss and Kwateng can stay leading the party as a result of that is up to them as politicians, and also up to the Conservative Party too. And I suspect we're going to be hearing a lot of that over the weekend. I think your suspicions are absolutely right. How it actually turns out, it's about politics, isn't it? And I mean, it's very, very difficult to predict that right now. I mean, this is why it's good to be a sort of business and financial journalist in these times, because you go by what the market thinks, and what the market thinks is usually right. And what the market thinks is that there will be a U-turn on some of the things, but those two will remain in power for the foreseeable future. But who knows? Politics changes day by day, minute by minute.
Okay, thank you, Michael Wilson. Now for business updates across the African continent. Rotus Odiri is here. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to our viewers. Yeah, we've had a restructuring kerfuffle over the last 48 hours. Here is Zainab Ahmed, Minister of Finance, on Bloomberg when she was asked about whether or not Nigeria is going to restructure its debt.
Are there any plans to consider local or international debt restructuring at all?
It's an option we're looking at right now. We're currently working with the Central Bank of Nigeria to securitize the borrowings that we have had to make from the central bank itself. So that's one aspect. In terms of domestic borrowing, we have plans to just roll over some of the instruments that are crystallizing in 2022 and 2020. That is refinancing them and just rolling them over. But for the larger portfolio of debt, we have just appointed a consultant to make an assessment of how we can be able to get additional relief by way of restructuring and negotiating to stretch out the repayments to longer periods.
All right, so bond yields moved on that news because it suggested that Nigeria is struggling to meet its debt obligations, and she used the word restructuring in her answer. Although she said that this is an option that we are looking at, and then proceeded to. So that's the interview. Now, the Debt Management Office then put out a note yesterday, I guess because when bond yields were moving. Clarification. They basically said that she was quoted out of context. Razia Khan who is a renowned economist with Standard Charter, then jumped in and put out a couple tweets where she said that essentially this was not what she said, that there was no restructuring. I think we have that tweet from Razia Khan, where she said there's nothing in the interview that Nigeria's finance minister did with Bloomberg that speaks to anything like a default, because that word started coming up now. Nigeria is not exploring a debt restructuring. Okay, then the next tweet, she then says that first the interviewer asks a leading question. I was a little confused at that. And then she now said the finance minister responded with details on broad debt initiatives. Kelvin Emmanuel, who is an analyst that we've had frequently on the show, responded to her and said, securitizing ways and means, which she mentioned in her answer, and converting it into debt stock. That is a violation of CBN Act of 2007. Is not restructuring? Really? Anyway, about 24 hours later, she then participated in a debate, a global debate with Michael Kearney, former Bank of England governor, as well. We have the poster of that debate that she participated in, along with Kristalina Georgieva of the managing director of the IMF, and a number of others. Richard Quest moderated. About PIMCO. Yeah. All right. Here's again. He touched on the same thing. Let's listen.
I want to turn to Nigeria and the Honourable Minister. Minister, just listening to what the former governor was saying, that decisions, that the markets, the financial world will punish. Thank you, your words. Is Nigeria about to be punished for its high debt level, do you think, that will require you to restructure it?
Well, we're actually feeling the pressures. The market cost is too high for us, so we cannot even explore the markets in the near future. And also because inflation is going up and is going to stay up for longer, our debt service obligations in foreign currency are increasing. And what we decided to do is not to wait for it to happen. We have to start looking at how do we better manage our liabilities. For example, our domestic liabilities, we've been able to shift our loans from short tenors to medium and longer term tenors. We have to do the same thing for our international borrowings as well, bilateral loans, and even some of the concessional loans, that the periods should be stretched to give us more fiscal room. While we are working to increase revenue, to improve on our revenue to debt service, we still need to be able to renegotiate and stretch out our repayment obligations to provide us with fiscal. So we are not restructuring our loans, but we're looking at options of how we can stretch out, including buying back some of our bonds when the market allows us to do that.
With respect, Minister, isn't that just playing with language? If you're doing all those things with existing loans, you are de facto restructuring.
But we're doing it ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're doing it to give us more fiscal room.
There's not enough time. Michael Kearney jumped in, Kristalina Georgieva jumped in, kind of came to her defense. But look, we should, because of time, let's just quickly move on to the El Rufai and CAD Invest, the 7th edition of CAD Invest, which is an investment promotion summit that Kaduna has every year. Here he is touching on privatization and saying government has failed in oil and gas.
In 2001, okay, against all odds of national security, this and that, we got out of telecoms. We raised $1 billion in license fees. We brought in the likes of MTN and Econet, and we decided to sell Nitel itself. What is the result? The result is what you're seeing today. You are only able to do this because of the investments in telecoms infrastructure that happened in the last 20 years. And all of it was private. All of it till today. There is no reason why the Nigerian government should still be in the oil and gas sector. It should just get out. It has failed. By every measure, it has failed. This year, NNPC has not brought 20,000 naira to the Federation account. Okay, we are living on taxes. It is PPT, royalties, and income tax and VAT that is keeping this country going. Because NNPC claims that subsidy has taken all the oil revenues.
You don't believe that?
I don't believe it. Okay, but this is what they say. Okay, so the government should sell everything in the oil and gas sector.
Again, because of the interest of time, there was so much that was, because he was also asked about the commercialization, the commercial entity, and he said, what's changed? They just added L to the end of NNPC, nothing else. So have at it. Lots of breaking news within the last 48 hours as far as what we've seen.
Rotus, we can't deny what El-Rufai has said. NNPC, as we speak today, is not putting nada to the Federation accounts. It is scary how we're even living. It is based on the good work of FIRS that we're living. Those taxes. That's what we're living. And I think I should screen it for the umpteenth time. NNPC is not putting anything to the Federation accounts. So that's why when they say this NNPC limited and all of that, and all of this shenanigans that goes on, it's just sad what is happening. I align with him. Can I say for the last time? NNPC is not putting anything into the Federation account. Concerning Madam
Restructuring.
Madam Zainab Ahmed.
Yeah.
Truth has to be said. This woman has been undermined so much.
Facts.
So much. This woman told us the truth. But what do? We undermine her. At first she said, pull out the subsidy.
Right.
Because it will result to this. Now we have the worst debt
Service to revenue ratio.
Service to revenue ratio in the world as we speak, to 119%.
Well, that's what the World Bank projects it will get to. You see, again, in that interview, she said it was going to be like about 65-70% or so for 2023, but it's still high.
It's very high.
It's still high. It's still high.
And what is happening on top of that? The fact that if you go out there to look for bonds, your bond rates are going to be high. Nobody will give you money at a cheap rate.
Yep.
So it is problematic. And what do? You have to restructure. So she said it the first time during the Bloomberg interview. The DMO picked it up.
Yeah.
Because they saw the effects. And they said, no, that's not what she said. But again, she said it again.
Exactly.
You see, no matter how much you try to use language, restructuring of the debt is the way to go.
It's restructuring.
And that's the sad reality of where we've put ourselves.
Okay, I mean, Zainab Ahmed can speak for herself. I'm not her spokesperson. However, the issues are as follows. The IMF and the World Bank at this meeting in Washington, D.C., they've made it clear that, in fact, next year is going to be worse than this year.
Yep.
Georgina Kristileva, the IMF boss, says that, in fact, we have to ensure that there's no runaway inflation. That inflation should not become a runaway train that nobody can hold on to. With specific reference to Nigeria, IMF, World Bank officials have said Nigeria needs to make sure, like other developing countries, that there is a proper alignment between monetary policy and fiscal policy. We have that problem here. They have said Nigeria has to look for revenue sources, tax, they recommended. 3, they have also said that in the case of Nigeria, we have to leverage on increasing crude oil prices in the world. Are we leveraging on that? No, we can't even meet our production quota. I think that we need to pay attention to that. Now, Zainab Ahmed, in terms of her participation, there was an event that was held by Nigeria on the sidelines of the Bretton Woods summit in Washington, D.C., and she spoke there. That was where they took the story from about debt restructuring. What she's simply saying is, which they are trying to play around with, is that the debt service period, we need to stretch it. Because as President Muhammad Buhari pointed out in his budget proposal presentation before the National Assembly, he said, look, the major problem we have in this country is revenue shortfalls. And that already is indicated in that budget 2023 proposal. At that same sideline event, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed pointed out that Nigeria is trying to buy into the food shock window because of food insecurity. Okay, they told us 2 days earlier that, there's enough in the national
Grains Reserve.
strategic grains reserve, But now the woman is saying we have to study the terms and conditions to see how the IMF can help us. Previously, we took from the special drawing rights made available to all countries of the world. The simple message was, as she concluded, that look, the subsidy regime is not sustainable and we need help. Because this economy, is on, what do they call it? Oxygen support. You know, so that is just the reality. So whatever anybody says, we are asking for restructuring, we are not asking for restructuring. We are in very serious situation. Even the National Assembly is saying that Mrs. Ahmed's proposal of ending the fuel subsidy regime by June is not acceptable. We're going to politicize it. Where would that leave us? This is the reality.
Dr. Abati, real quickly, rice alert. I hear a bag of local rice now has now hit 40,000 naira.
Wow.
It will get to 100,000 before December.
Please,
and Rotus, you may not be able to. Well, no, you are a big man. Given the quality of that phone, that quality of phone you are carrying, you'll be able to afford 100,000 naira for a 50 kg bag of rice. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.